Marie Stopes International is a name that might be recognizable to many. This is because it is the largest abortion organization in the English-speaking world, as they themselves claimed in 2014 to have provided more than 3 million abortion-related services. They receive about £250 million from various funding streams, mostly from their partners, which include the UK government's Department for International Development, United States Agency for International Development, and many other Western organizations and many other Western nations. My particular interest today is on how Marie Stopes International is using these funds in their operations in Africa. We spoke to Dr. David Payton of Nottingham University's Business School about one of Marie Stopes' major partners, which is the UK's Department for International Development, to understand a bit more about how this funding operates, as well as the relationship between Marie Stopes and the Department for International Development.
DFID is the Department for International Development, and that's the UK government department which is charged with overseas development aid. They have a big budget, so the government manifesto commitment was to increase spending on overseas development to 0.7% of national income. That works out to about £12 billion per year, which is about 16 billion US dollars. Now, some of that spending goes on emergency aid, on developing infrastructure, but the UK government has always, at least over the past 20 years or so, pushed funding for so-called reproductive health, for population reduction measures and for family planning. And in 2010 there was a particularly big push. The UK government decided to say they're going to focus a lot on reducing what they called unsafe abortion. DFID spends perhaps £500 million, about £500 million per year on population, reproductive health and family planning measures under bilateral aid alone. So DFID works by working with partner organisations. One of the major partners in the area of so-called reproductive health is Marie Stopes International. Now, Marie Stopes International was originally and still is a UK-based organisation founded by Marie Stopes, who is a notorious eugenicist and has a somewhat checkered history, but they are one of the biggest providers of abortions around the world. Now, there's lots of grey areas here, of course, because in some of the countries where they work, abortion will be largely illegal or legal in only certain specified circumstances. Now, Marie Stopes, in their agreements, will say they will try to work within the law. We know that hasn't always happened. In Zambia a few years ago, they were caught out providing abortions which were illegal under the Zambian framework law, and the government there stopped them from being funded to perform abortions.
Here is a short video clip of Paul Cornelison, Marie Stopes' Program Director from South Africa, speaking about how Marie Stopes provides illegal abortion all over the world. He said this at a conference in London back in 2007. As you will see in a moment, the situation in 2016 is still the same.
And then there's various options, you know. Once we open a centre there, we do illegal abortions all over the world. And in a way, we can help people, you know. We're just over the border from Johannesburg to Pretoria. We can even women with big need, you know, try and find a way to commute them backwards and forwards. There are various things we can look at if we can just get our foot in the door there.
We spoke to a young African woman, a nurse, who had worked for Marie Stopes International in the western region of Uganda. Some viewers may find her description of Marie Stopes' abortion practices very disturbing.
I entered thinking it was a family planning organization, but they disguised that, and through the induction it becomes different, and it's all about abortions.
And it's good to point out once again that abortion is not legal in Uganda. So what did you think when you saw this?
It was a blow. I didn't think there was an organization that was going against the rules of Uganda. I also didn't think that it would be that gross that an organization would think about abortions. I thought they would uphold lives. It was a surprise. As much as Maristops disguises as doing post-abortion care,
Right.
it does real abortions.
Because I've looked at their website, it's hard to tell. In some of the countries where abortion is not legal, they never really write it clearly. But you are telling me now from the inside what you saw was that girls came to them and they were offering abortions from beginning to end.
That's very true.
You had your induction and then you went to your center
Yes,
to
I
manage.
did.
And this center was in what region?
In Hoima, southwestern region of the country.
But people came in, was this a busy center? Was it a small?
It was a busy center, but the most clients that came in were abortion clients, really. Women of all ages, but mostly young women, young girls, actually,
Young
school-going girls.
Underaged young girls.
Sometimes, yes.
16?
Sometimes, yes.
Wow. So this could have even been girls maybe who were exploited sexually. Were there any questions asked before any abortions, like who got you pregnant, or are you in trouble, or have you
No.
been raped?
No. The main motive was doing the act, the abortion. The service was abortion. The service was not finding out who or
No
where.
questions asked.
No.
So anybody can come in on the same day and get an abortion on
Yes,
that day?
they can. Yeah.
There is no time to think about it. They don't give you time to think about
Not
it. They
at all.
don't. Do they ever tell people other options like adoption, or do they ever offer any other kind of help that any woman can use if she didn't want to have an abortion?
There is no help. The service is an abortion. I think in Maristops you would rather lose a family planning client than lose an abortion client.
Please explain this.
Abortion, it's the core business. It's more important to them than I used to see family planning be important anyway. At the end of the month, there is a projection for how many abortions has the center done. So the client has to be convinced and you make sure the abortion is done.
Anybody ever cry, or anybody ever say?
Oh, they cry all the time. The procedure in itself is painful. They make a lot of
talk
noise.
about some of the procedure, at least as much as you can, that you know and you're comfortable to talk about. What happens then when it's time?
They go into the abortion room.
Yes.
All that is there as a silencer is a loud radio, really.
A radio is there.
There's a radio. As the girl continues to cry and shout, the radio is also increased so that it distracts the outside from the inside.
And who is there with the girl?
The medical officer, the clinic officer.
Or two people, or who?
There is a clinic officer doing the procedure, and the nurse is here talking to the woman to distract her from the pain. That is here on the head side. And she keeps on distracting, asking the girl, how are you, where are you coming from? So she gets distracted from the pain. And the clinic officer is acting on the client and doing the abortion.
And the medical officer is a doctor or not a doctor?
He's a medical assistant.
So a medical assistant is the one performing this abortion?
Yeah.
So this is also good to clarify that Maristops, in this, at least while you were there, as far as you saw, they were not even using doctors to perform abortions.
No, they don't use
these
doctors.
Abortions are not even legal.
No, they don't use doctors. A doctor works with family planning procedures. They use manual vacuum aspiration.
So MVAs.
MVAs, yeah. It's a very painful procedure, by the way.
It's a painful procedure?
Yes, it is. They cry, they scream out loud.
And when they do, what happens?
The radio is increased to distract the outside.
So while this is going on, the girl is screaming in the abortion room.
Oh, yes, she is.
And the radio is increased louder.
Yeah.
Wow. This is incredible. And this happens routinely. This is not just one girl. This is for many of the girls that come through.
Yes.
So they do this suction aspiration, and then what care does the girl get afterwards?
Painkillers and antibiotics.
And then she's sent home the same day?
Same day, same time.
And then what happens to the baby's remains?
They're disposed of.
How does Maristops at least the center that you worked in, how did they dispose of the fetal and baby remains?
Before 14 weeks, flushing toilet. After 14 weeks, pit latrine.
Every time? This is like routine?
Yes.
And who does it? The staff, the people who perform this abortion, or what?
The person who performs the procedure, I think it has become normal to them. They are trained, Maristeps trains them.
Yes.
They are good at what they do.
They are good at what they do. So they are good at performing these abortions and flushing down the baby's remains
Yes,
down
they
the toilet.
are. Mm-hmm.
And you also said this is up to 14 weeks pregnancy, and this is more than 3 months pregnancy, by the way. And they also perform abortions after 14 weeks?
Yes, sometimes they do. As per Maristeps guidelines, they are supposed to do an abortion up to 14 weeks. But according to their projections, if a woman walked in at, I think, 5-6 months, they still do this abortion using Maristeps medical procedures.
And then how do they dispose of these dead babies?
Pit latrine.
So they throw the baby in the pit
Pit
latrine.
latrine.
Wow. What a desecration. What a desecration
Yes, it is.
of human remains. What a desecration of human remains. Did you know, as the manager, at the time when you were there, who were the donors that were named, at least that you knew, the foreign donors or organizations that was bringing in money into the pockets of Maristeps?
Every time we went for regional meetings, and every time we would have like donors coming from USAID.
USAID.
Yes, USAID.
Right.
And what I know is that they would tell us to hide abortion equipment because USAID did not deal with abortions.
Right.
So we would clear up the center from anything that would look like non-family planning.
And USAID came for inspections?
Yes, they did come for inspections, but they couldn't tell.
So they never knew?
They never knew.
As far as you know, they never knew abortions were taking place, and Maristeps did everything to conceal that.
Yeah.
Any other organizations that dealt with Maristeps?
DFID.
DFID, that's UK as well. The
Yeah.
DFID, the Department for International Development, which is the UK Office for Humanitarian Aid.
Yeah.
So what did you know were the dealings with DFID?
I remember knowing,
Yes.
anyway, being told
Yes.
that every abortion we made, they paid Maristeps for that abortion.
DFID paid money for every abortion performed by Maristeps.
That's
That's
what I
what you were
remember
told.
being told. I don't know how true that is.
Yes, but you were told that.
Yes, I was.
And of course, by the way that they were trying to promote for centers to have more abortions, the money was coming from somebody,
Yeah.
somewhere. So they needed to account for abortions.
They needed to account for it. Yes, that's true.
So DFID was also a major donor that you knew of.
Her eyewitness testimony of illegal abortions by Maristeps International raises serious questions about Maristeps International and their relationship with the British government. It also raises serious concerns about how Maristeps International is using funding from various other Western governments who fund them and yet may not even approve of their funds going to illegal abortion operations in Africa. Funding given to Maristeps International for their activities in Africa has come from taxpayers who might indeed be outraged that their funds is being given directly or indirectly to an organization that provides illegal abortions. So what can the ordinary person in the UK, the ordinary taxpayer here in the UK do to correct this?
So I think the first thing to do is to raise awareness of what is happening and of the sort of organisations that are being funded by taxpayers' money and what those organisations like Maristeps International are doing. So what UK taxpayers can do, of course, is to put pressure on their elected representatives to question whether this is the right way that they want development expenditure to be used. So I think that they're the two things, to raise awareness within this country of how the money is being spent and to put pressure on our MPs and members of the House of Lords to get the government to change its priorities.
As Dr. Payton said, it is very important to raise awareness of how taxpayers' money is being channeled to supporting Marie Stopes International in their activities in Africa. If you live in the UK, you can contact the Department for International Development to complain about the activities of Marie Stopes. But if you are watching this from the United States of America, you can also help by contacting the United States Agency for International Development, who provide funding to Marie Stopes. And if you live in any of these other Western countries, you can complain to your government agencies about their funding for Marie Stopes International. Finally, if you live in any of these 16 African countries where Marie Stopes International has their operations, you can help to end this by contacting the major national newspapers in your country or any other national television or radio stations. Thank you for your support.